Welcome back. Thank you for staying with Morning Express. So we want to delve into the murky waters of offshore accounts. What's the fuss about this? And perhaps if the individuals were different, would we have the same interest in understanding how exactly this works, the impact on the local economy, and perhaps if you're a state officer, should you actually go this particular route? Joining me in studio, Professor Exen, Iraqi economist, Professor Emmanuel Mutisia, an economist as well, Nambale, Member of Parliament, Sakwa Bunyasi, and via way of Zoom, Martins Owino, the Member of Parliament for Ndiwa constituency. I'd like to start with the economic minds in the panel. What's the fuss, Professor Iraqi, about offshore companies? How exactly do they work? And is there an underhand motive while going for offshore accounts?
I do not want to be the first one on this, but I'll take it up.
Okay.
I like the name Pandora's box. And I think what we should do today in this forum is to open this Pandora's box on behalf of the Kenyan public. Mm-hmm. What is it all about? And if you look at the tax havens, as they are called, they have two essential characteristics. One of them is secrecy, so that when I open an account there, nobody will know who it is. And number two, very low tax rate, if any. So if you have some money that you have got either legitimately or illegitimately, you can take it to a tax haven where you are sure that it will be secret, and two, you pay very little tax. And the beauty about that, beauty in quotes, is that you can channel that money to where you want. So there are two types of people who go to tax havens, good people and bad people. But I think in this discussion, we are putting too much into the bad people, that you must have stolen that money to take it there. But there are people who have taken money to tax havens legitimately, because sometimes it is not illegal, it is legal. But let's also ask a few questions about tax havens, particularly in the context of this story. One, I would like, and I'm not defending anybody, I would be very happy if we had more leakages instead of focusing on one person. So are there other Kenyans, for example, who have money in those tax havens beyond our president? I wish we had that list, and that would give us more mileage. Number two, and very important, I think this is also good news in another way. It shows how sophisticated the Kenyan financial sector is, that we are able to go beyond our borders and put money elsewhere. As an economist, I see it that way, that you should put your money where you get the highest returns, or where you get the best security. But number three, which is a bit concerning, is that by putting our money in tax haven, we are showing that we have no confidence in our financial systems. Otherwise, we put that money here, we put it for development. Instead of borrowing money from other countries or from other jurisdictions, we should use that money to develop our country. But I want to put this issue in another way, in a very, let me be radical. Yeah. Why don't we make Kenya a tax haven so that we get all that money? It might appear outrageous, but that's a possibility, because some of the countries that have been listed as tax havens are very developed countries, Singapore, Switzerland, and so on. But
what does it take to make Kenya an offshore tax haven?
We just need to change our rules, our regulations, so that we make it easier for people to come and set their companies here, and we make it easier for people to come and start businesses here. And of course, we assure them a bit of secrecy and confidentiality, and they'll bring their money here. The question has always been, do these tax havens benefit the citizens of this country? If they do, have no problem. But I think we should not just look at tax havens emotionally. Let's look at them and let's filter the news about tax havens with an economic lens, not just political lens.
Okay, so let's take a look with an economic lens. Professor Mutisia, there's so much secrecy, there's so much confidentiality. What factors should one take into consideration when you're trying to explore an offshore bank account? Is it all to do with the corporate tax in that particular country? And add to this discussion, is there any implication on removing money from Kenya, which was perhaps gotten within these borders, and I happen to invest it elsewhere? What implications are there to the local economy?
No, thank you very much, Jesse. I'm just going to add to what Professor Iraqi submitted, and I do agree with what he has shared with us on the factors, on the components, and on why these tax havens are there on this planet. Number one, let us go a little bit back. When you look at the African continent, why tax havens have been an issue is because they have been operated mainly by politicians. If you go back to Mobutu Sese Seko, or if you go to Sani Abacha of Nigeria, those are the guys who moved monies from their own countries to Switzerland and other offshore accounts, of course, to safely keep it there, confidentially, and of course to have the capacity to access it when need arose. And I think the challenge and why this conversation is becoming too emotional is because we're looking at these tax havens from that kind of perspective. But there is one factor that Professor Iraqi has raised, that those leaders or businessmen who stash their monies in these accounts go there purely to generate more wealth, because their taxes are lower compared to maybe their countries of origin or their countries of residence. And that is one of the key factors. And I think when you look at it, I would assume that there's too many Kenyans who have these offshore accounts in different countries on the planet. And this, we've seen it before. We've heard about some of these leaders, and this is not a conversation that we should take too much emotional, just because one family, the first family, has been listed as one of those leaders who have those accounts out there. We should note that, one, there is the factor of legitimacy. As the professor put it well, there are two groups of people. One of it is illegitimate. Those are the ones who launder money, who steal money from citizens and take it out there to go and sort of hide it for their use when they get out of power. Then there are the legitimate accounts. These are accounts that are run by businessmen, of course, including leaders who are running their own business activities there and who would want to make more money, in some of these accounts. This is a factor that we need to look at. Now, why we are looking at the political side is because of the immorality part of it. These are leaders. An example in our country where we are talking about budget deficits, where we are talking about, increase in oil prices, where we are talking about cutting down of taxes so that the common citizen can access, services with less pain. This money, if it was brought back to the country, or if it was invested in the country, or if it was banked in this country, then one, we would not be going for billions of dollars from outside, China, Japan, or Europe, and the US, monies which is usually too expensive, and which the country has a lot of pain in repaying. Given the size of the economy and the amount of money that we're getting from our taxes in this country. Number two is the factor of creating an enabling environment for those billionaires or those Kenyans who have money, so that they can put their money in the country and support the growth of the economy, ensuring that instead of giving that 1% of taxes to Switzerland or even Singapore, that 1% gets back to the economy. So there has to be a line that must be drawn to ensure that we make it more attractive for such people to bring their monies back. But then the other factor is those guys who have stolen our monies and stashed it out there. One of the biggest challenges is that those countries, give an example of Singapore, not Singapore, but Switzerland, who have been putting or using, providing opportunities for stolen cash to be stored or saved in their countries. Such is very immoral, and it is the issue that we are facing as a country, but also as a continent. Okay. Now, that money, for example, the government of Kenya should be sort of following those tracks to ensure that money gets back. It is used for the purpose that it was meant to be used for, and also it makes the lives of our people better, increases their quality, and of course improves the status of the economy as it is today. If we bring this back, then certainly, of course, we are going to see a change, and the deficit that we're talking about will be a thing of the past.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it's not illegal to own an offshore account. I think that's in the offing. So Sakwa Bunyasi, it's not illegal except when you're a state officer. I don't know if you happen to be a state officer, because we all know what Article 76 mentions. So perhaps let's start from that particular point. When you're a state officer, should you actually take this route? Whether it's your family who's involved and you happen to be one of the benefactors or the beneficiaries, how do you read into this with the laws of the land in place?
I want to urge my colleague panelists to analyze this, and they have a high capacity to analyze it deeply for Kenyans without any attempts at sanitization. First, let's discuss through what it means for this economy, what it means for the political system, and then we can begin to say, was this done in a way different from that, and was a good one or not? First, why do you need the private tax haven if you have an open investment intentions? There are ways in which you can a nation invests in outside of their own country, but in ways that are public. We invest in companies that are quoted on foreign exchanges, for example. So our funds get to move, technically, so to say, out off our borders. But money flow in and flow out. The reason pressure has been put on tax havens, like Switzerland, for example, or those islands and many other places, the Singapores of today, by richer countries like the US, for these tax havens to open up, so that you see the legality of the transactions in them. There is something that is shielded. That's why it is a haven. A haven is a nice place in the middle of something else that is not so good. So here, yes, they get tax benefits, but there's more than that. We don't know if there's money laundering in it, for example. We do not know if the money is actually stolen. It's all mixed up. So a good one may be in there with the bad guys. So this particular, let us... we shan't get to know, by the way, very much yet. It's going to be released perhaps progressively. But let us then say there that if you're a head of state or head of government, why do you want to move your funds out of the country? It might be because you feel that the rules in the country are not such as for you to maximize returns on the money you've got, that you perceive certain risks that you could lose your money. You're trying to take it out of reach. In some countries like Israel, something like this, the Prime Minister would have resigned. You need to demonstrate, as citizen number one of the country, that you have confidence in the country that you lead, so that you can then deal with all of those others that may be seeking to hide their money and tell them bring it back. And my colleague has mentioned, co-panelist has mentioned examples we've had. We had it with the Haile Selassie. They lost, I don't know how much they ever revealed. Mobutu Sese Seko, Moise Chombe, and many, many others that have been having these kinds of facilities simply to take the money out of reach of their own governments. So I think this is not good news for the president at this time, no matter how we attempt to sanitize it. And I think it's something that maybe he will decide, I doubt that, but maybe they will decide to bring back the money, and they have put pressure on everybody else to bring back the money. Then our need for borrowing will reduce, because the funds will now circulate within our financial institutions and investment arrangements, so that we don't have, at the margin, we don't have to borrow that much more. I think that's not good news in my view, and we can't sanitize it. Okay. As it is now. So I think that's really my major concern. And also it's not within the law. I was worrying, having worked outside in a UN institution, I was worrying even, for example, whether my pension, which has to be put in some account from the institution there, was illegal. I checked, I said it wasn't. I was getting worried about those kinds of concerns. I don't see how leaders can get in this sort of thing. On the one hand, we have this tax haven taking money out. On the other, we have thieves also stealing, taking money somewhere else. I mean, the net effect is a depression. It sort of pushes down. It's an Achilles heel on our economy. Okay. We must work to get out of it.
Interesting. So, Martins, from where you sit, of course it's not illegal, and we've put that out there. But it's a morality question, especially when it involves leaders who are leading a country whose economy is not doing well, but yet you're right there. You yourself are taking wealth out of the country, especially a lot of wealth, and it was made within the borders. So from a morality point of view, do you question the intention of owning an offshore account by a leader?
Rogers, that's why we are waiting for the president to answer this verbatimly, because it's not illegal. We do not know when they started this. When is already president or private citizen, all that. But I want us to know that, as you say rightly, it is not illegal. In fact, some people do offshore business for broader investment. Now, the question would be, after you have invested and you have accrued money, do you return invest in local economy? That is hidden from us. But one thing we also know is that people do business offshore in order sometimes to run away from lawsuits, or credit cards, or those kind of things. It's not only tax heaven that they use that. There's so many things advantage to that. But the moral side of it, after it is all done and you have accrued your benefits or you have accrued more money to it, it comes back to Kenya. And how I wish, Roger, that this kind of investment would be done to rural economy. For example, if you take my constituency, you lose a lot of it. Why don't you turn those into property? A lot of beans, soya, a lot of peanut butter. Why don't we invest in our rural economy? This is the question that Kenya can ask. And we would also like, as one of the panelists said, if we could have a list, who will be the first one to throw the stone? That is reasonable. You know, many people are doing this, but for what purpose are they doing it? This is a national debate that we ought to have, especially when these are coming out, and I hope many will come out. So on where I am, where I'm sitting, I would say, we give the president a chance to explain himself, because it touches those moral questions when you are the first in the country. But having said that, we should also know that it's not illegal. Have we brought back some money out of this? Of course, it cannot come back to fund the exchequer. No, we still have to borrow loans. These are personal investments. But the question will be always asked, why there and not here? Especially rural economies. So let's give me a chance to explain to Kenyans. And more should be an ad so that we know who is how do they do it.
Well, I'm sure many Kenyans are anticipating that particular explanation by the president if and when it comes. But Exen Iraqi, money laundering is, you mentioned there's a good side and a bad side to it, and we delved on the good side. But Kenyans are also aware that there are a couple of Kenyans, Chris Okemo, who's a former finance minister, and the ex-Kenya Power boss, Samuel Gishuru, who the duo are accused of setting up offshore companies that siphoned public funds that were stashed in bank accounts in the Jersey Islands. And taking a look at the World Bank findings again, 70% of these anonymous shell companies were involved in grand corruption. So money laundering might be in the thick of this. How exactly does this happen? And are there institutions in place to find out if these proceeds are from corruption? Because you mentioned there's so much secrecy and confidentiality when it comes to these offshore accounts.
That's the elephant in the room, that when you hear the word tax or the term tax haven, what comes in your mind immediately is some proceeds of corruption. Now, somebody has stolen money in this country, somebody has done something illegal and put the money there. And that's what's making tax haven such an emotional issue. And I agree with the other panelists that it is immoral, and even if not illegal, for a country like Kenya or any other country, where a majority of the population are struggling to make ends meet, and then you take that money to another country instead of putting that money in that country. Okay. But what we should be asking is, why does that happen? Is it that we don't have confidence in our socio-economic systems? And that's the debate we should be focusing on. How can we make the Kenyan regulations, Kenyan laws, Kenyan economic environment so conducive that there's no reason why anybody would want to take money abroad? If you remember about last year, KRI came up with an amnesty. And you told Kenyans that you can bring that money back to the country. And we're not going to ask a lot of questions. I don't know how much money was brought back.
1 trillion.
1 trillion, which is good money. If you look at our debt, which is about 9 trillion or so about 7 trillion, that's very large amount of money. So what we should do is let's change the regulations, let's change the laws, let's change the working environment so that nobody in this country has any reason to take money out. And number two, are we going to punish those people who have gone to taken money to offshore account when it is proceeds of corruption or proceeds of fraud? Because we must always look at the bigger picture. Why should we not invest in our own country? And number two, which is very important, this is a bigger concern. If I have some money in an offshore account and it is not known who is the owner, I can use that money for wrong reasons. For example, we are going to 2022 political polls. Okay. Could some of that money in tax havens be used to influence the political direction? And you can imagine now if we discover that somebody is winning polls next year, not because he had better policies, not because he was more convincing, but because at the end of the day, he had more money elsewhere. So I think we need to look at this issue not just politically, but also economically. Okay. And we need to look at the end of the day, are there better alternatives to investing our money than putting it in tax haven? And in my opinion, if we make our environment, our economic environment very conducive, very attractive, there's no reason why we should be taking our money to the offshore accounts. But those who steal money, take it there, they should be punished using appropriate laws.
But with the secrecy in place, can we really find out whether these proceeds are of corruption, are from public coffers? Because I think that's the issue, right?
Yes, that's a big issue, because if you look at the case about Jersey Island, where some Kenyans have been involved, it has dragged in for years. True. Because we still don't know whether that money was legitimate or not. And people remember that it's not poor people who take money to offshore accounts. Okay. It's people who know the legal system. It's people who can hire lawyers. So I think the best thing to do is to stop money from flowing to those offshore accounts. It will be easier for us to deal with that money here than when it is far away. Okay. But I think it's a question of rules and regulations.
Okay. So Professor Mutisia, I'm looking at revelations that Kenyans were holding close to 51 billion Kenya shillings abroad in private bank arms accounts. And due to that particular ultimatum by EACC at 2015, between 2016 and 2019, wealthy Kenyans wired back to the country 1 trillion Kenya shillings, an estimate rather, taking advantage of that tax amnesty right here in the country. What's the impact of such money coming back into the country and getting into the circulation?
Well, Jesse, before I respond to that question, let me start by pointing out that the illegality of monies stashed in accounts, in these tax havens, is something that has been there for the longest time possible. And to me, I think, taking money out of your country has always been done by public officers who, of course, this is an assumption, had stolen that money from public coffers. And that is why when you talk about tax havens, we are always looking at it from the negative part of it. Because you need to have this secrecy, you need to have confidentiality of where your money is kept, so that at the end of the day, when you are out of the public system or out of power, then you have a place to go and, you have monies that you can go and use out there. When you talk about bringing this money back, bringing is a different part of it, but once you steal money in this country, for example, the system has become so complex that it is easy to track your monies from one account to another if the system wanted to do that. It's only that, when we start following these corruption cases, the system has a lot of issues that we end up not getting to the root cause, the transactions, the trail and everything that is involved in this process. And this is something that we need to relook at, as Professor Iraq put it, that we need to strengthen our systems to ensure that we create a system that takes care of some of these things that we're talking about. And a system that, of course, puts barriers against corruption, so that even when there are issues of money being moved out of this country, there is always a way of getting that money back. Okay. Now, when you go back to the monies that, of course, were brought back following the amnesty from EACC, the critical part of bringing money to the country is, of course, the aspect of money supply. When you look at the issue of circulation of finances in this country, it is a challenge that we are facing today. And as we put it before, we are saying that Kenya is going out there to get loans which are very expensive, which are denominated in foreign countries, and which any volatility of these currencies always affects the amount of interest that the country pays. And that is why we are coming to a level where we're not able to pay our loans back to those guys who are giving the country loans. The point here is that if there was a way of repatriating these resources back to the country and ensure that the resources are used to bridge the gaps of budget deficit that the country faces, and that the money is invested in the country, and those taxes that would have been enjoyed in another country now come back here, and KRI gets an opportunity of getting all this into the basket, that of course runs the development of this country.
Okay.
That would be, to me, the most critical part. And the issues that we're facing today, when you talk about increase of taxes of the most basic sort of products that we have in this country, that is putting a lot of pain to the common citizen. It is something that can be bridged or sorted out if some of these monies is brought back to the country.
Okay, so Sakwa, as you add your voice to what has already been said, the laws in place when it comes to the Leadership and Integrity Act that affects state officers, when it comes to the Public Officers Ethic Act of 2009, are we really getting it right? Because just recently we had President Kenyatta sort of impose a blanket issue to do with state officers declaring their wealth, and we have that particular law in place. Public officers should once in every 2 years declare their wealth. In terms of the laws in the country, are we getting it right in terms of fighting corruption and the stealing of public coffers? Because it's not just at the national level. We have counties as well who are managing humongous amounts of funds as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Rogers. First of all, I think that these individual instruments of law and the statutes that have got in place, I intend to look at it from different directions, and you have enumerated them quite well. So individually, they make a contribution towards improving transparency, integrity, honesty in transactions, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that we have no one that stands back to unify it all, to look at it holistically. The EACC, the Anti-Economic Crimes, the Economic Crimes Agency would be one such, but I have a feeling that the move in starts and fits, so I don't think that they are yet looking at it holistically. And also, this is white collar crime most of the time, so it's very complicated. But the intention in an economy might be to say, let citizens move their resources openly. If they felt that the returns on their investments within the boundaries of the Republic aren't good enough, they can move their resources out, move them back, or follow the tax rules. Either way, in theory, if you are in those institutions overseas, you could see those balances. They are not held with such secrecy that sometimes when the owner dies, nobody can access the money because they don't know what symbol they used. So I think just some sort of openness in how this is done. And I think we should, we as a country should push hard enough while we can set rules for open overseas investment. It should be also something that those resources that go, it's not just checking that they were not stolen, but even if they were legitimate resources, it would indicate a barometer that when leaders begin to put their money out, it means they are worried about what's happening inside. Mm-hmm. The risk, as I conclude, Rogers, is that if you have money outside, even legally, you can manipulate the exchange rate, for example, so that at the time your money comes, it increases the earnings in shillings substantially. That those kinds of things, those are risks that we are talking about. They're not occurrences, but they are risks. That's why I think the pressure that in countries, particularly countries like ours that are seeking for capital from everywhere, we should seek to invest within the economy or within the bounds, even if it's outside of the eyes of this economy, following our laws, but accepting the laws of the outside world, and getting out of the transactions that are criminal. You saw how much noise was made on Eurobond, for example. It hadn't been stolen, no. It had not even been invested yet in a way that people are worried, but you just saw how much heat there was, and it's not dead yet. It's not over yet.
Okay, interesting. So I'll ask to take a short break. When we come back, we'll finalize on this particular talking point. I know, Martin Zowino, you've been holding on your thoughts for quite a while. We'll get to explore what you have to say about this Pandora box that has been opened by that particular expose by a couple of journalists who are looking into this Panama Papers and whatnot. We take that short break. We'll be back in a few. Stay with us.